when they explained it to me, I told them, I said, I think you're nuts. What are you talking about?
His son was arrested for OVI, but he wasn't drinking. He's autistic. Tonight, the family is sharing their story to try to raise awareness about what happened.
Two families say their sons were charged with drunk driving after being pulled over in Dublin, but neither was under the influence. Instead, the families say the men failed the field sobriety test because they are autistic.
And one of those families is now speaking to Olivia Fecteau. It's a story you'll see only on NBC4.
On his way home from swim team practice, Richard Mazer was stopped by Dublin police just around the corner from his family's house. Richard Mazer has been driving for 7 years. At 29 years old, Richard is autistic, a Paralympic swimmer and involved in the community. But on October 19th, 2015, his life changed.
I thought the worst. So when I ran down the driveway and saw the blue lights, you know, I freaked out. He was already arrested, handcuffed, and sitting in the back of the police van. Your worst nightmare.
Dublin police pulled Richard over for driving erratically and failing to use a turn signal. Officers gave Richard field sobriety tests, from hopping on one foot to walking in a straight line. His mother, Lauren, says they explained to police Richard can't complete those tasks because he's autistic.
It doesn't matter if you can't hop on one foot. You don't practice hopping on one foot. You don't practice walking a straight line, but you do practice driving a car.
Richard failed the sobriety test that night and was arrested for OVI. The charges were later dismissed after a urine sample came back negative, but the experience has been devastating.
He wouldn't drive at night. He wouldn't go to swim team. We severely cut back his hours from swimming because the mistake he made that night was he was tired and he forgot to turn his signal.
I went to the Dublin Police Department to ask about this traffic stop and one 5 months later involving another autistic man. Chief HEINZ von ECKARTSBERG says field sobriety tests are designed to apply to anyone who can safely drive.
Intellectual disabilities don't really play a part in what we're looking for. We're looking for the person's ability to drive safely. Our officers felt that at the time, under the totality of the circumstances of what they saw, that those gentlemen were not safe to drive.
But Richard's family says they believe this was a wrongful arrest and say police officers need more training and education.
They have to think beyond a handicap plate on or a placard hanging from the mirror that identifies somebody as having a disability.
Charges have been dismissed for Richard as well as for the other family. Both families think Ohio should implement some sort of legal document or driver's license endorsement to indicate when drivers are on the autism spectrum. Reporting in the studio, Olivia Fecteau, NBC4.
That is a challenging situation for the families and for the police who really don't know what they're facing when they pull someone over.
If you're a police officer and you're following an automobile that's apparently going erratic, your first response is to pull the over that the driver may or may not or may be impaired.
Yeah, but it would be good if they had a placard or something.
A placard or maybe something on the operator's license to indicate that as well. We first told you last month about Richard Mazer, an autistic man arrested for drunk driving after failing field sobriety test. Good evening, I'm Mike Jackson.
I'm Colleen Marshall. Now we're hearing from another family who went through that same experience. NBC4's Olivia Fecteau is here now with a story you'll see only on 4.
This is Chris Page. He was pulled over for OVI this March, even though he wasn't drinking. His family wants to change how police officers are trained, and they want the state of Ohio to adopt a card like this one. As Chris Page pulls away from his mother's house in Dublin, it's a far cry from when he was pulled over for speeding back in March.
You know it's 55?
They asked if I was drinking and I said no, just had a Pepsi.
But Chris failed the field sobriety tests.
If I was violated because they handcuffed me, and I'm not a criminal.
He told officers he was autistic.
Like I said, maybe that medical condition, but we're not doctors, we can't testify to that.
Yeah, I know.
We have to go off the clues that we have.
He was totally violated for having a disability that they were not educated about.
Months later, and even though the charges against Chris were dismissed, his mother Diane is still upset.
When I watched the video, it brought tears to my eyes.
Chris now carries a card in his wallet that identifies him as autistic. In other states, cards like these are legal documents.
This is something Ohio needs desperately.
Diane Page is pushing for these cards and training for officers.
I'm not going to stop till it happens.
Policing is a complex profession, And it's not getting any simpler, we know that.
Delaware County Sheriff Russell Martin has experienced this from both sides. A family member with Tourette's was pulled over several years ago, though he wasn't arrested.
It was kind of a tough experience for him simply because of the officer just wasn't familiar with Tourette's syndrome and what accompanies that.
Martin's office is helping pilot autism training for officers. The program won't roll out until 2017, but for Diane Page, training is the first step to make sure other people with autism don't go through what Chris did.
There are going to be a lot of individuals driving and living normal lives like Chris, and they deserve to be understood by police officers and treated with respect.
The sheriff's office is working on that training program with a local law firm. We'll be following that as they roll it out. While training for officers is crucial, everyone we talked to for this story told us it's not a fully developed solution unless there's a way to identify drivers as autistic in a database or a registry. Reporting live in the studio, Olivia Fecto, NBC4.